Jani Beatty, SBA Relationship Manager, and today we're talking to Rob Radanovich about something every buyer, seller, broker, CPA has experienced at least once. Deals that fall apart in the 11th hour. And honestly, like Rob said, most of the time, it's avoidable. I'm joined today by someone I work with on several transactions and genuinely enjoy collaborating with, Rob Radanovich, senior broker at Transworld Business Advisors. Rob is originally from Hawaii, and fun fact, no matter how busy Rob is, you can find him on Tuesdays the entire ski season at Mount Bachelor with his daughter, who is also an entrepreneur. Just a little mic drop. She owns what pizza shop in Redmond, Oregon?
It's actually in Tumalo. So it's kind of considered Bend. It's right between Bend and Redmond. And it's called Pisano's Wood Fired Pizza. She actually, and my brother and my daughter are partners.
So entrepreneurship runs in the family.
Runs deep.
It's in the business. I love it. Right. I love it. Next time I'm in Tumalo, I'm stopping by. I'm getting
I look forward to it. We'll have pizza.
Pizza. All right.
Thanks, Jani. It's always fun to work with you. It's been so much fun in the past couple of years touching base on these different complicated projects, and was really happy that we're able to get them to the end. You never know what's going to happen before closing. Sometimes the unexpected happens. Sometimes you can avoid it.
Exactly. And, some buyers assume once they get that signed LOI, they're there. The hard part is over. In reality, that's just when it starts. So let's talk about let's start with the biggest theme because it shows up in almost every single example that we listed out for this episode. And you brought it up when I sent my planning notes to you and you highlighted it, and it is
lack of planning.
Lack of planning, that's right.
Absolutely. Deals can die for so many reasons, but usually not one. If it's large in material, it can make a difference, but honestly, there's the loss of trust and the loss of just moving things along. So it's very important to be prepared.
I mean, deals usually die 1,000 little deaths and not just one big one you're thinking of in the beginning. Let's talk about one that's near and dear to both of our hearts because we both run into it together. Landlord consent in leases.
Oh goodness, that just goes on and on. There's a saying in business brokerage that it's landlords and attorneys that kill deals. I haven't found that to be the case with attorneys for the most part, but with landlords, it's really important to get ahead of that. Oftentimes we'll have buyers negotiating and it can be very difficult.
Yeah, it can be very difficult. It sometimes helped if they can sometimes you've walked into some landlord negotiations and been able to help massage some difficult areas. Sometimes that's not possible. The biggest things I've run into when the landlord takes 3 weeks to review the landlord agreement or the lease agreement, or they come back 3 weeks later and they won't sign the SBA landlord consent agreement.
I think part of that is really, again, the broker not working with the banker closely and really getting people in line. When possible, the broker, it can often be helpful to reach out to the landlord. Sometimes sellers don't want that to happen, but you're right. The refusal to sign the SBA landlord consent agreement can be a challenge. I've not found it to be an overly large one, but the 10-year term that's required by the SBA can sometimes put pressure on the deal. But all in all, that's the way it goes.
The way it goes. I think that on the landlord consent, it's not the collateral that you run into issues with that the landlord has a problem with. What they have a problem with on that landlord consent document specifically are delays, because they want to be able to, if this tenant fails, they want to be able to lease that space out again quickly too. So that has become an issue before anymore. And honestly, I've learned through them early errors. I start this conversation about the lease with my buyers, with all the parties. If there's an attorney involved, with that party as well, and with the brokers, sometimes even before the LOI. But by the time we get to an accepted LOI, that's a big topic that I go over.
Yes, there's no doubt that landlord review can take time. And, one of the big challenges as we finish this conversation is really looking at the length of time it takes to put a deal together. In theory, you just want to do everything at once. That's the best way, but not everybody's prepared to do that. And then when you get onto industries, especially things in trucking with logistics, construction, restaurants, and it's just a challenge. Insurance costs can really jump in. There's a lot of other things to touch on.
Yeah, insurance has become, again, it's one of those things. If you've been doing this for a while, you're a banker, you're a broker, you got to know if you're not talking about leases, landlord consents, and insurance at the beginning, you could run into a problem at the end and then not being ready for, and you can't close. And all the parties are surprised, and no one wants to get surprised by that. And that's kind of what the experience of being in this business for a while teaches you.
It sure does. And speaking to insurance, oftentimes a buyer might be stepping in and they have some relevant experience, but they don't have specific experience for that specific industry. And the insurance company can look at that less favorably. And so at times they get a surprise that the rates are not going to necessarily be the same. I haven't had too much trouble, but there can be different rates.
I've never run into that before. I've run into as a lender needing to prove why, the experience my buyer has is relevant for the business they're buying, but I've never run into what you're describing with insurance, but that does bring a different layer on it. So thank you for sharing that. That's
Sure
interesting.
thing. Sure thing. But again, to your point, licensing, contractors, heck, liquor license, that's a whole nother issue. Anytime you get the state involved, you have the likelihood that there's going to be a delay. It's just the way it works. You got to plan for it. And at minimum, if you can't control it, make people aware so they can keep that in mind. Because if you can anticipate a potential problem, you can understand a potential problem. When you don't anticipate it is when the buyers, the sellers get frustrated. Everybody gets uptight. It is stressful, and pre-planning is critical.
Yeah. Tell me about, now this is one that's near and dear to both of our hearts because we've both run into it before. And that's when something, you have a buyer who starts, let's say, for example, they're buying a subcontracting company and they need to have the CCB license. And they start early, like they start on day one. They've already given, 60 days to close. State of Oregon, for example, comes in and says, oh, we're about 8 more weeks behind.
It is very difficult. Some years ago when I started in this, the CCB licensing was taking a very short period of time, maybe a week or two. And then over
Yeah.
the last few years, it's been growing to where it can be months. And then, I think specifically in one that you and I are discussing, or at least thinking about, there's the problem where the insurance company may require, excuse me, the CCB license company requires oftentimes that insurance is set. So, but they're not going to give you the license yet. So you're paying insurance. This can be a challenge for sure.
Yeah, that can be a challenge. And it can be a challenge too. If the CCB, if you don't have a license, you can't run a business. So one of the ways that I've recently had to work with it, and I know you have too, is we've had to do what's called a bifurcated close. And that's where the seller stays on, being the, the responsible party, continues to get the CCB. All of the expenses are run through the seller. All of the labor's run, everything's run through the seller, even though the buyer has the business now in possession.
Yes, it can be complicated. We try to avoid that whenever possible, but oftentimes where creative minds are at play and you have people willing to come up with solutions and you get help from the bank because there's the golden rule. The gold is owned by the bank and they rule. So we've got to make sure that they're on board. But if you can come up with a solution and you're working with a bank that will help you with these things, it can make a giant difference. Bank is very important as just as an attorney, your financial advisors, and hopefully the broker plays a positive role there as well.
Yeah, well, I like one of the reasons why I love where I work is we can get very creative when it comes to this landlord consents and other common issues we run up against. We always start them early, we stay on top of them, and hopefully don't run into too many hiccups, at least those that we can control, or as you like to say, for lack of planning.
Well, that just leads us into the next thing, payroll and PTO adjustments, not to mention
Yeah.
vacation and liabilities. How are these handled? Were these negotiated in the LOI or did they get forgotten? Did the broker bring it up? Were they planning to prorate it through escrow? How are these things handled? Those are common things that sometimes are not initially addressed, but hopefully as you work with your team, that you're able to tackle those things. A good M&A attorney is really can really be helpful. And as a broker that enjoys getting these deals done to the finish line in a timely manner, I've got to tell you, having a good attorney on both sides can be extremely helpful. Where having one bad attorney in the mix, when I say bad attorney, I don't mean a bad person or even bad at their job. I just mean one that is maybe distracted, or doesn't have the time set aside for this project. It can be challenging. It can add another layer. So there's a lot. But Janie, we've talked about financials many times as well. How about that?
Oh, messy financials. Oh, I know one of my favorite things. Ad backs. There's a lot of ad
Ad
backs.
backs, ad
Ad
backs.
backs.
What are
Let's
ad backs?
talk about ad backs. Yeah. Tell me about ad backs, Rob.
Well, my goal is to, in most cases, present perfect financials with perfect relatable tax returns and no
Mhm.
ad backs. However, that's not the reality that we live in. Oftentimes, there are discretionary earnings, and sometimes there's non-standard ad backs that are requested. Banks need to review those, and it's important to have a bank that actually understands the way business is really done and can apply logic where possible to help the deal move along. Some of these ad backs can be difficult to accept by a bank or a buyer. So, I would caution everybody to review the financials carefully, have their respected advisors look at them where needed, and understand the cadence of the way business is done in that particular industry and by that particular company.
Yeah, and as we like to say, have receipts.
Yeah, that'd be
You want to do
nice.
the ad backs, have receipts. And I think you remember this is what we worked on, where we had a seller who might have expense, so they were a subcontractor. They might have expensed all the supplies for building their homestead through the business.
That may be possible. So
There
yeah,
might have been a
there's
baker
there
there who added those back.
there are very creative ways that people run their businesses, and when it comes time to get your loan, it's really important that if those type of ad backs are going to be requested for consideration, that they organize them and they make them available for review.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, I want to go back to the adjustments that are done at the end and why that's kind of, I just had it happen. Was it 2 weeks ago, where an attorney brought, he handed me adjustments. We're talking payroll, PTA, accrued vacations, bonuses of a sizable sum.
Mhm.
So, and they were going to credit it, right? Put a credit to it, which increases the sales price and the escrow, that offset right there. So in this case, it was fine because we had a buyer who had more than 10% down. In fact, they were putting like 25% down. So it didn't functionally change everything, but it did change. It can change, right? We have to go back, redo our documents. We've got some
Well,
differences there.
absolutely. I mean, these things can be shocking to buyers, and this is where hopefully the advisors that are involved have looked at those things and at least have an idea of what we're dealing with. First of all, how are these things going to be reconciled? Are they reconciled through a working capital adjustment in a more complicated transaction? Are these settled in an asset sale where the buyer is going to, excuse me, the seller is going to settle them all at closing? Or are some of them going to be passed through an escrow company? All these
Right.
things need to be looked at carefully. There's way more than one way to do this, but all should be clearly, really clearly laid out for both parties to understand, and also to keep the banker in the loop so they're not blindsided when this happens. It's not good.
This is why I love working with you. You would have not sent that to me the day before closing after the documents have been shipped out to all
If
parties.
I did, I would have an egg on my face for sure.
That's true story that happened, but we dealt with it and everybody got taken care of in the end.
Well, I guess really setting a realistic closing date, that can
Yeah.
always be a challenge. And I've noticed that the larger the deals, more often they just tend to take a little longer. The bank requires, I think, and you can speak to this, there's more scrutiny involved, and different bankers have different, I guess, different lending abilities, or different authorizations. So, that would be helpful to understand, depending on the type of deal that you're buying or that you're selling.
Yeah, I mean, I think for lenders, we need enough time after everything's been completed to get our documents out to get our final approval. And that can be a real stretch when you're still getting negotiations done or you don't have it, you're missing really fundamental items that we need to have before we can draw our documents. Maybe we have our approval pending that. But that can, that can really make things muddy. I think for me too, one of the things I run into realistic funding dates or closing dates. So I will have the conversations with my buyers and the brokers. They want to go 45 days, but I know, like, for example, the CCB is taking 8 weeks. Then, having that conversation with all the parties up front and not being so aggressive that we're just not going to be able to get this all wrapped up in a neat bow on the time. It just doesn't help anyone.
Totally. You're just not setting them up for success when you say 45 days. In my mind, you'd need to have a negotiated contract or very close to it in hand with a very thoughtful LOI put together. You
Yeah.
need to deliver it. Financials would need to be very tidy. Um, you'd need to be able to be confident that the lease is not going to be a hiccup. You need to
Hmm.
make sure that any licensing that may need to come together is well thought out. And in most of the businesses that I transact, there's very rarely are you going to have all those things line up. There is going to be something that needs to done and needs to take time. And then even further, Janie, oftentimes a buyer is really unwilling to start the process with you until they've finished different parts of the negotiation. Um, and it's just required. It's just you have to do it one step at a time. So a 45-day close, you better be ready to get busy.
Yeah, you better be ready to get real busy, unless it's a simple, you
That's right.
know, but you don't do simple. So
I'd like to. I'd like to.
it's the goal one of these days.
That's right. Well, I
Um,
have a very complicated one I'm working on that actually is been running so smoothly that it's been a wonderful, wonderful um, deal so far. I mean, both parties are so thoughtful and kind to each other, both looking at things very fairly and settling it. And anyway, every once in a while you get one.
I love those kind of deals because it shows that everyone's working together really well. And oftentimes it's big kudos to the broker for setting up that relationship between the buyer and seller where everyone's coming together and they've facilitated that. And it makes things really beautiful. And so when they run into hiccups along the way, maybe it's something with the attorneys or in the contract, there's not this butting of the heads and where things can really go off when that relationship between the buyer and seller is set up to be, meaningful and cooperative.
Well, that's the hope. For the most part, I find that most buyers and sellers work together reasonably well. There can be, whenever you're negotiating dollars or critical things, it can get a little dicey, but usually things go pretty well.
I think that kind of leads us to the other thing that people don't necessarily always think about up front. Some do, but you and I both know how many CPAs and attorneys we refer. Underrated factor, choosing the right professionals in the beginning. Tell me a little bit about how you handle that, Rob, and what you do.
I've been lucky to be doing this for a little while, and over time, you start building working relationships. And these aren't friends; these are just working relationships. So often, we try to refer two or three, so that way a buyer or a seller has the opportunity to interview them themselves. It's really, whatever they decide, however the personalities line up. Those are just up to the individual. However, I try to refer people that we've had good success with, the people that look at things pragmatically, not only from their client's point of view, but to achieve what their client is trying to accomplish, not to fight to win, because their client is hiring them to win, which is to accomplish what they're doing. And sometimes there's give and take. Red lines are fun, but eventually somebody's got to give when you get to a point where things don't move forward. And that's usually where I guess really the broker can really make a big difference.
Yeah, the broker can make it so that we're not setting each other up for when you put too many red lines, it creates distrust within the transaction. And sometimes that can be, we're talking about professionals, and maybe an overeager attorney who's, we both had it happen. That's why we refer attorneys who are focused on the goal of protecting their client, but
Yep.
also getting to the end, not just creating I always say it's not creating problems where problems really don't exist.
Yeah, to just further that, I try to tell the clients that, or at least explain to them that when they hire an attorney, they should be hiring an attorney that's going to accomplish the goal. The goal is to either buy or to sell. Either one, it's the same goal, it's just a different side of the table. So now, how do you get there? If you don't guide your attorney because you're the one writing the check, they're paid by the hour, generally. That doesn't mean you shouldn't take their advice, but you're still the
Hmm.
boss. They are going to protect every bit of risk they can for you, and that's their job, and they do a great job at it. But
Yeah.
sometimes you might be willing to accept some risk where the attorney isn't comfortable with it, and you have to make a decision. So I've had good luck. I really must say that I've been able to work with some incredible people, buyers and sellers, and it's really given me a lot of faith with the younger group coming up because I've met so many amazing young men and women.
Oh, that's great, Rob. And I've actually heard you almost to the word say that to parties involved when things have become intense with the parties. And you have said exactly what you just said, which is, you know, focus on focus on the goal here. And
Yep.
is it worth fighting? Or is this really worth fighting over? I understand your attorney's uncomfortable with, but is it practical?
Yeah, you just have to apply it, and there are the legal matters I try not to address. Things with reps and warranties, that's a little different.
Hmm.
I'm not certified to be a good guide on that. I really put that back in the attorneys and the clients, uh, I guess, on their table. But when it comes to the give and take of different parts of a transaction, I do want them to. I guess really, when you get right down to it, a great transaction is when both people feel maybe a little less, they got a little dissatisfied, but they're happy they got it done.
Yeah.
So, there's a little give and take. There's a little
Yeah.
give and take. It's hard to get everything you want.
Yeah, absolutely. So, wrap this up. If you had one piece of advice to give buyers trying to avoid last minute delays, disasters, um, less, things that could possibly kill the deal, what would your advice be?
For a buyer, you said.
Hmm. Or seller, both parties.
Well, I guess it's a little bit different, but just generally speaking, for a buyer, I would address it in the idea of look at yourself as the owner of the business and start thinking of the methodology of the way the business is being run. Start asking the correct questions of how does the money come into the business? Where is it earned? How is it stored? Is it inventory? Know more about the business. So know as much as you can about the business, then carefully go over all of the things that your banker, your broker, and your attorney are talking about. Read the contract. Don't only rely on the attorney. Ask the questions that you don't understand. Ask the banker, ask the broker, what does this mean? Because you want to try to save money.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when there's something that comes up you don't understand, you need to understand it. If you can't get through an SBA loan or really read through the contract, you have to really think about it. Are you cut out for business? Think about it because being in business is can be extremely rewarding. I think one of the best ways to set yourself up for life, but it's also serious. And then sellers, really, really, Janie, just be prepared for a bit of a battle. It's going to take some time. Hopefully, you have the right mindset that you must get your financials tidy. You must
Hmm.
dedicate the time to keep the business running while you're under the stress of trying to sell the business because how's the bank going to look at it? They're going to look at the last quarter, and the last quarter better be good.
And this was one of the many reasons I love working with you, Rob. It's really well put. You're a great broker for many reasons. Thank you for
Well,
sharing that.
honestly, it goes both ways. Your bank and your help has been instrumental in getting some of these deals done. It's just that's why I enjoy working with you. And
Thank
actually, a
you.
shout out to Paul. Paul's been a great partner there at your bank.
He's awesome, and I love working for him.
Yep.
We have a great time here. And one thing I will say for me, for piece of advice that I like to tell my buyers when they think it, because they all are going to get insurance, the lease agreements, the negotiations, the working capital, inventory, everything, hours, employees. Oh my gosh, all of this stuff, right? It's all so much to do. Um, and inevitably by the time they sign a term sheet and an LOI, I'll have this conversation and I'll talk to them and say, this is the easy part.
Right?
The hard part is running a successful business. Think of this as your, is think of this as your entryway into ownership. If it was easy to buy a business, we'd have a lot more failures.
Yeah.
When you get through the process of buying a business, you've really kind of toughened up.
100%. The one
Now
thing
you
I
need to get
didn't
started.
mention, the one thing I
Mhm.
didn't mention would be what would you do for buyers? I would say I would advise buyers to consider making changes carefully after the transaction post-closing to really learn the business, learn
Yeah.
the people before you go in with a broad brush. It's not recommended from my experience. I think there might be maybe special transactions where there's safety involved, where you need to change the rules because they're not operating in a safe way and there's liability. But generally speaking, be slow to change, meet people, get the employees buy-in on what you want from them before you just come in and start changing everything they've been doing the same way for 25 years. You've got to really think about it.
If somebody comes in and they tell me that they're going to change everything in a business that's been run successfully for 25 years, it's a
That's
real
a red
pause.
flag.
As a
That's a red
blender, that's a
flag.
real pause because one of the things I need to talk about, if they're going to make changes, great. Show me what those changes are. I can add that to the underwriting, but you're going to spend 6 months to a year learning how to keep the business that's already generating the revenue that's made that business successful, that's made you want to buy that business.
Absolutely. There's been a number of negative stories that really aren't appropriate for this venue, but yeah, I've seen that happen and kind of go the other way. It's not recommended.
We'll sum this up with most 11th hour problems didn't start in the 11th hour. They started early.
Absolutely, Janie. There's no doubt about it. And honestly, from my perspective, from the broker's perspective, a lot of
Yeah.
times it's not setting things up for success in the very beginning. It's not preparing the sellers for really what they need to do or making sure that the buyers are thinking of these things. And sometimes they just get pushed down the road and then it becomes a problem.
Thank you, Rob. And thank you for joining me today.
Oh, Janie, it was awesome. Always good to see you.